Welcome to this video introducing Natural Church Development, or NCD, and why this approach to church health and growth has been adopted by the Salvation Army across the UK for well over a decade now. My name is Lynn Chetcuti and I'm appointed as the Territorial NCD Consultant. Whether you're a divisional commander, a mission enabler, a commanding officer or an active member of a local corps, it's my desire to support you as you invest in your own spiritual growth and that of others. As disciples of Jesus, we are called to fulfill the Great Commission, namely to make disciples of all nations, teaching them to do all that Jesus has taught us. NCD is about exactly that. As we invest in the health and development of our individual corps, what we discover is that healthy churches are missional churches. You see, the healthier a church is, the more its members instinctively reach out to others and live inspiring lives that point people to Christ. The healthier we are, the better placed we are to welcome and to enfold the visitors who are invited along, not only enabling them to find a place of belonging, but also a place where they will discover who it is God has created them to be and what it is He's called and gifted them to do. You see, healthy churches equip and empower everyone, helping each person to discover how God has uniquely formed them, pursuing all that He has for them, and growing in personal relationship with the Father Himself, living lives of worship. God has given you everything you need as a church to fulfill His calling in your lives. Some of those resources you don't yet realize you have. Some are in their infancy and need to be developed, but nonetheless, they are within you. Some you see, and perhaps yesterday they were being used well. However, today we face different challenges and opportunities, and you can capitalize on the resources you have by being open to reassess where and how best to invest them. Sometimes the same approach is correct for years, even decades, and sometimes we need to work differently. Take a look at the cart on the screen and consider for a moment what you see. Everything needed for the job is provided by God. But sometimes we have the wrong pieces in place. Sometimes we have, for example, gifts and talents that we're not seeing. Perhaps they are in their infancy quite simply because we're not using them and therefore not developing them. In the picture, there are all sorts of essential wheels, including round ones, but they're not in the right place. You know, the workers are certainly not lazy. They are working extremely hard, but not getting value for their effort, because you see, square wheels are just not nearly as efficient as round ones. Like lovely people, but with the wrong gifts and talents for the job. And believe it or not, underneath all that stuff in the cart, there's even a sail that when hoisted up, God will use to make the whole process work beautifully under the influence of the Holy Spirit. Here's a better picture. And what's the difference? Well, here we're simply stewarding all that God has given us, using His resources for His purposes. I don't know about you, but I think the second illustration looks much more fun. We reassess our businesses and careers, in our family life and even our hobbies, and so we need to do so in church life. This health investment in our church is about identifying all that God has given us and empowering us to steward that well. As we do so, as in the parable of the talents, He will bring the increase. Understanding that the increase comes from God is vitally important. And it's equally important to appreciate that we have a critical role in this. Many of us put a great deal of effort into investing in the growth of the church. And yet the truth is, we know that we're not capable of actually doing that. Jesus, and He alone, will build His church. Our role is like gardeners. It's to tend the garden, basically identifying and dealing with things that inhibit growth, like clearing weeds and providing appropriate watering. As I say, we can't make the growth happen. Only God can do that, but we can, and we are called to address the things that hinder growth. Research, covering over 100,000 churches worldwide from every denomination and theological persuasion, megachurches and those that are tiny, long-established congregations and brand new church plants, consistently point to 8 key factors that are invariably stronger in growing churches than those that have plateaued or are in decline. As we invest in these essential qualities of healthy church life, we naturally see increased growth and health. And before you ask, let me say yes, of course, this is scientifically and statistically proven. Here are the 8 essential qualities. Note that in each case, the adjective is the key expression. While all churches have leadership, research shows that it's crucial to have leadership that empowers others. So let me ask you to consider how empowering your personal leadership is. And I appreciate that some of you will want to say, well, actually, I'm not a leader. And it may be that you don't have a leadership title. But in truth, there are very few people who never inspire or encourage others, who never help others to get to where they want to go. And doing these things is leadership. I have a gorgeous little grandson. And while if you knew him, some of you may think that he can be incredibly bossy, actually let me assure you that what he demonstrates is quite extraordinary potential leadership. Even at his young age, he's quite successful at influencing others to do what he feels needs to be done. As you look at this list, where do you think your main strengths lie? And what do you think is your minimum factor? Is it empowering leadership, gift-based ministry, passionate spirituality, perhaps effective structures, inspiring worship services, holistic small groups, need-orientated evangelism, or possibly loving relationships? Have a look at this bucket. Imagine the staves represent the 8 quality characteristics: empowering leadership, gift-based ministry, etc. And imagine the water is the number of people who visit the church and may potentially remain as members, or of course could simply spill over the sides with no intention of returning. We can only ever grow to the level of our lowest stave, or what we call the minimum factor. If we've been growing, seeing new people come to church, finding faith, and then find that growth stops, we should consider what steps we need to take in order to continue facilitating that growth. For some of us, tragically, it's so long since we last grew that we've perhaps lost sight of that potential. And in that case, even more than ever, we need to consider how we might play our part in seeing the church that Jesus promises personally to grow experience that blessing. Some will conclude that we should pray more. But of course, if one of the long staves represents passionate spirituality, then while improving that is desirable, it's clearly not what is currently most limiting our growth at present. If your absolute strength is, say, worship, growing in worship, frankly, isn't going to significantly increase your growth, because that isn't the thing most restricting you currently. But identifying and addressing your minimum factor, perhaps loving relationships or whatever it is that's at the bottom, that will have that effect. At any given time in a church's life, one of the 8 quality characteristics is strategically more important than the others. And that's the one at the bottom, the lowest stave, or the minimum factor. Each one is vital for developing the church, but the minimum factor is the area where we will see the greatest growth and development as we improve that quality. Raising the quality of the minimum factor often results in quantitative growth. So let's have a look at each of these quality characteristics, starting with empowering leadership. The leadership in healthy growing churches realizes that their main task is to equip and to empower people for ministry. Leaders don't need to be superstars or great visionaries, but they do need to invest in others equipping and releasing them to do the ministry of the kingdom, and facilitating a learning process, actually assisting them to discover their God-given calling, gifts, talents, passion, etc. The role and purpose of a leader is to equip and to empower others for ministry. It's not necessarily to do ministry for them. When your children are small, you dress them, and rightly so. But your aim is not to keep them dependent, but instead to see them grow up, equipped not only to dress themselves, but able to earn their own income, to choose their own clothes, and indeed put clothes on the backs of those who are unable to help themselves. That is empowering leadership. What about gift-based ministry? In healthy growing churches, the members know what their gifts are and use them in their God-given ministry. They invest their best, and therefore the ministry of the church is based upon these gifts. In these churches, the mission isn't to fill empty slots with the nearest available body, but rather to identify and to use that which God has already given to build the ministry and programs of the church around these gifts. It's important that we understand our gifts, that we match gifts to task, that we help people to recognize the significance of the service they provide, and that we coach and mentor our people. How supported do you feel in your ministry? How well trained, or for that matter, challenged? What would help you to have a greater sense of personal development and satisfaction through serving others? As we turn to passionate spirituality, let me ask you to consider your church members. Do you think they're more in love with Jesus today than they were, say, a year ago? What about 5 years ago? And if so, how do you see that growth demonstrated? Are your people passionate about their faith? Effective structures is the fourth of these essential qualities. In healthy churches, the structures, i.e. the goals and objectives, the leadership structure, the budget and program, they're all in place to serve the purpose of the church and kingdom ministry, not the other way around. The structures must serve the life of the church rather than having life having to adjust to rigid structures. It has been said, "Blessed are the flexible, for they will not be bent out of shape." Consider your structures for a moment. Which can you see that are particularly helpful? Do you have any that hinder? And if you do, when will you review them? We all love to participate in inspiring worship services. They're very important to us. Again, this isn't about style, nor does it mean that a service is entertaining and a good show. An inspirational worship service is one where the people experience the presence of God when they come together to worship, where God breathes, which of course is the original meaning of inspiration, where God breathes on his people as they gather. As you look at this topic, consider when you think the worship service starts. And the answer is probably much earlier than you perhaps think. Perhaps when they drive into the car park, or even possibly when they come across the first piece of information encouraging them to come. Today it's quite possible that happens as they Google you. And when does it finish? Well, not before they pull out of the parking bay. When your folks come to church, let me ask you, do they encounter God? If so, is it a life-changing experience? Are there things that you could do to help this? And when I ask this, I don't mean that there are ways in which we can make God move. I mean, there are things that get in the way. There are things, very ordinary things, that actually prevent people from experiencing the presence of God. Little things like temperature, lack of friendliness or comfort, and of course volume can be a big concern for people. If your adults have an inspirational experience, is the same true across every people group? What about the children, the youth, etc.? Moving on to holistic small groups. As the early church gathered, it did so in homes around Jerusalem. Healthy churches also have healthy small group structures, where people meet in more relaxed and intimate ways. Here they can share their lives in a different way from they can in that larger corporate gathering. In the safety of small groups, members can share their dreams and fears, their struggles and their victories. The small group members can pray for each other and also serve each other in practical ways as the need arises. Many will say that their church doesn't have a small group network, but that's unlikely to be true. It may not have an official register of home groups, but in most churches, people will gather in smaller subgroups. Most churches have a leadership team, even if it's only 3 or 4 people. Most that serve refreshments will find the same people sitting at the same tables each weekend. Each of those gatherings is a small group, including the team delivering the refreshments. Some work hard and yet fail to get people to attend Bible studies, but nonetheless have vibrant friendship gatherings that just naturally happen throughout the course of the month. And each of these is a small group. Once we learn to identify the small groups that we have, we can begin to consider how we might invest in them and their leaders. Now, I'm using the term holistic, and it would be fair to ask, what exactly do I mean by that? A holistic group invests in the fullness of the person, irrespective of the purpose or goal of the group. Question: are you investing in the heads, in the thinking, in the hands, the life application, the doing, and in the hearts, the spiritual and emotional well-being of your people? You may have an emphasis on one, but are you nonetheless covering all 3? While many churches find developing small groups to be hard work, and as such they give up, let me encourage you not to be one of them. Ultimately, people come to church for many, many reasons, but they stay primarily for one, and that is that they make friends. Relationships are developed far deeper and more quickly in smaller group settings than they are when we only have access to corporate worship meetings. Now, penultimately, we'll look at need-orientated evangelism. Here we want to consider personal evangelism, corporate evangelistic strategies, seeker awareness, and of course the assimilation of new Christians. It's evident that a growing church must evangelize, but in healthy churches this isn't seen as a program, but rather as a lifestyle. It's something that actually comes naturally, and it focuses on the needs of the people the church and its members come into contact with. It is possible to preach the gospel without connecting or resonating with your audience. Let me ask you to consider, do you know what the needs are of the people you're trying to reach? And do you have a communication strategy that will connect and resonate with them? As church, we want the door to be open to anyone and indeed everyone, and that's absolutely right. However, when we try to reach everyone, invariably we actually reach very few people. Who are the folks that you are trying to reach? And how are you going about serving them in a way that meets their needs? What resources, what gifts, talents, knowledge, experience, time, etc. do you have as a church that can be used to meet these needs? And how are you mobilizing your people to do just that? Resonating with the needs of people and providing solutions based on felt needs, challenges and problems will open hearts for the gospel. And finally, we appreciate that healthy and growing churches are characterized by a high degree of loving relationships. This relates to the relationships inside the church, but also going out from the church. The command of Jesus that we should love each other is taken seriously in these churches, not just as a concept we believe in, but it's actually shown in practical and tangible ways. As you look across your church, do you see an atmosphere of joy and trust? What about interdependent relationships, affirmation and encouragement, intentional conflict resolution? These are all essential as we look to develop significant, loving relationships with each other. Consider for a moment how often members of the church actually invite others for a coffee or a meal. How aware are they of things that concern others? And how motivated to help when they're able to? If our only time together is a Sabbath worship service where much time is led from the front, we have very little opportunity to develop significant discipling relationships. Love is costly. It takes time. Question: is loving relationships a real priority for you and your church? So that was just a quick visit to each of these 8 quality characteristics of healthy church life: empowering leadership, gift-based ministry, passionate spirituality, effective structures, inspiring worship, holistic small groups, need-oriented evangelism, and loving relationships. All biblical principles, and all backed scientifically with statistical evidence that when we invest in these, all of which are within our ability to develop. Essentially, when we do what God asks us to do, He of course comes and does what only He can do, and as such, He grows His church. The key question is, how can we release the potential that God has placed in every church? The truth is, He's not limiting our growth. We are. We need to find out how and where we're doing that, and then simply address that blockage. And that's where the NCD Church Survey comes into play. The survey will assist you and your congregation to assess how strong you are in each of these areas. It'll help you see areas that are less developed, and indeed within those, it'll pinpoint the specific aspects that are currently limiting the growth of your church. The survey essentially takes the temperature. If you like, it provides the diagnosis before the therapy. It helps us to identify the root cause of the issues that we're experiencing, and then helps us to consider how we are going to overcome those. What our implementation process should be. Now, of course, if you go to a doctor who diagnoses your condition, prescribes some medication or action, and you don't take the meds, you don't follow the advice, then actually the likelihood of getting better is somewhat reduced, is it not? And the same is true here. No survey will actually fix anything. It simply informs your thinking. It gives you the right information to make the right choices. It tables the right conversations. Once you've taken your survey, it's then imperative that you act on the information you have. Have a look at the diagram on the screen. The survey is the test point in this illustration. Once you have your results, it's important to take time to understand them, and in some ways, that's exactly what we're doing through this teaching today. We need to understand not only what they say, but also what that looks like and how it's come about, why that is the case, etc. As part of this process, you'll want to identify areas where you as a team would like to see change. Consider what looks most significant for you for the season ahead, and having done that as a team, then make your plan. Like all good processes, having planned the work, you must then work the plan, doing the very things that you intended, and being accountable for exactly that. Of course, you may strategically adjust the plan as you go, but don't be distracted or derailed. Work the plan unless you have intentionally changed it. You'll soon begin to experience some changes, and the time will come to assess the changes, to consider afresh where you now are, to identify the benefits that you've experienced. And you can do that by, of course, getting ready to take the test afresh. And we'll coach you through this entire process. When you're ready to take the next steps, please contact our team and we'll be delighted to support you. We'll allocate a coach to you and your team to stand with you through the journey, actually helping you every step of the way.